So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about some of the research that I've been doing with my group in ecoacoustics. Um, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I undertake my research and pay my respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and to recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have always played an important role in protecting and conserving the land and sea. And today I'm in Brisbane. I'm in Mianjin, coming from Turrbal. The Turrbal and Yagara are the traditional owners of the land where I am today. So what I want to do today is to talk a little bit about my journey in ecoacoustics. I want to make some observations and then kind of zoom back out and talk a little bit or pose a question perhaps about research support. So I've been working in ecoacoustics for quite a while now, for certainly at least sort of 15 years. I guess I'd probably describe, in terms of my background, I'd describe myself as perhaps a lapsed computer scientist. I used to be interested in programming language and a lot of nerdy things like that. And over the years, I've sort of become interested in sort of ecoacoustics, which probably means I'm not really able to sort of speak sort of deeply about computer science or about ecology, but I do know a little bit about ecoacoustics. So in terms of what ecoacoustics is really about using soundscapes as an environmental record. So the idea is that soundscapes can provide a direct and permanent and objective record of the environment. So we can use them to sort of understand our world in new ways. So it's a bit like satellite images, using satellite images to sort of understand vegetation. So we can use audio recordings to understand sort of fauna, vocal fauna, and other things as well. So we can also use them to understand sort of disturbances, weather, and things like that. It's kind of a young discipline. It's one in which there's a lot of sort of challenges that I'm going to talk a bit about, but there's been a lot of rapid progress over the last few years, and Australia is taking a leading role. I'll just play this soundscape now. Hopefully you can hear that. This is a soundscape from Sanford, which is near where I'm coming from you today. So this is part of a morning chorus we recorded using the Acoustic Observatory that I'll speak a little bit about. So I guess one of the questions is why bother? Why listen to the environment? Why make these audio recordings of frogs and birds and animals? And I guess one answer is that we simply don't know a lot about the beautiful land in which we live. Australia is sort of mega diverse. There's a lot of unique ecosystems. We don't have a lot of good baseline data. A lot of the areas we just don't know what species are there. There's a lot of changes happening. Obviously, there's sort of climate change, there's bushfires, there's sort of floods, invasive species. So it's really important that we understand what's happening. If we can kind of understand what's happening, then we can kind of do things about it. And in fact, we are doing a lot about it. There's a lot of interventions, there's a lot of planting, there's reintroductions, there's sort of feral animal control, but we really want data so we can kind of understand what's sort of happening. And there's also things like sort of nature positive, the nature repair market, and just like with sort of carbon credits, there are ideas about that we could have sort of biodiversity credits and other ways of measuring and valuing biodiversity. But the first thing is to actually have some data to understand what's there and what's happening. Animals use sound to communicate. So it is signal. It is about kind of communication. It's not just random. They don't just sort of do it for fun. This book by Karen Backer is absolutely wonderful. I thoroughly recommend it. She talks a lot about how animals communicate and how technology has really allowed new insights into the sort of quite often hidden world of animal communications. We're discovering a lot of animals communicate in ways which we were completely sort of unaware of. You know, we're finding that there are things like some river turtles, for example, where the hatchlings inside the eggs actually sort of call out to the mother. There's lots of wonderful things which sort of happen in the natural world. Lots of animals sort of communicate, and this is something we can make use of to actually sort of understand where animals are and to get a better understanding about our natural environment. There's a long history of recording. There were some sort of pioneers in the sort of early 1900s who used some of the very first recorders to record sort of nightingales in the US. There have been sort of people from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology sort of very early on who were pioneering the use of lightweight, and I say that in inverted commas, lightweight recording gear using sort of these sort of large parabolic microphones and things to make recording. And kind of more recently, people like Bernie Krause and Stuart Gage, who introduced me to ecoacoustics, started recording entire soundscapes and sort of pondering whether and what we could understand from these long continuous recordings of the environment. There's also been a lot of work done in sound analysis, and again, quite a long sort of history of that. People have produced sort of machines for sort of understanding sounds, for producing these sonographs, these sort of frequency time sort of plots. They were sort of used in some of the original books about sort of birding, some of the original sort of field guides. So there's a long history of people recording sound and wanting to analyze sound, often using concepts from music and things to sort of understand sound and what sort of happens. What's happened, of course, is that we are now able to digitally record and analyze sound. And so there's been a huge transformation that sort of occurred with the sort of digitization of information. In particular, with things like kind of Moore's law, which sort of predicts this or anticipates perhaps this sort of exponential growth in processing and storage capacity, the move from kind of analog devices, analog ways of analyzing sounds, analog ways of storing sounds, the digital ones, has really sort of transformed things. And in a sense, what we did is we took a bet on Moore's law. When we first started many of our projects, we weren't able to fully analyze data digitally. We weren't even able to sort of store all of the data, but we took a bet on it that we would be able to keep all data eventually, and that we would be able to use AI to analyze data, and that sort of paid off. This sort of idea of sort of storing data is not a new one. Particularly in other disciplines like astronomy and bioinformatics, they're really predicated on this idea of storing large data sets and really undertaking science in quite a different way, where you start from a large data set. So rather than starting with a hypothesis and designing an experiment and collecting data, you start with the data. So the idea that we had was whether we could use these, whether we could benefit from Moore's law by storing all of this data to turn sort of ecology, or at least sort of fauna observation, really into a data-driven science. And we wrote a paper on this quite a while ago now, and after I think almost 9 years from writing the paper, we were actually then able to do this, and we built this acoustic observatory through an ARC LEAF project grant. This was a collaborative project. It involved when I was at QT at the time, Charles Sturt University, James Cook University, University of New England, and University of Queensland. It was really about this idea of continental scale biodiversity monitoring. So it was really a big data approach. We are putting out sort of almost 400 sensors. And these sensors are continuously recording. So you've got sort of 400 sensors. The project life, at least at the beginning, was sort of 5 years. The project's ongoing. But if you sort of do the multiplications, that ends up being sort of two millennia of data. And all the data that we record is made available. So it's all made available under a Creative Commons license. So it's sort of fair data, and it sort of supports research both in sort of ecology and computer science, citizen science. We've also got people making creative uses of the data. So this is quite a different way of undertaking research, because what we've essentially done is we've started off by kind of collecting the data. We didn't start with any a priori kind of questions about the data. It's not a kind of curated data set. It was really there to provide a resource for people to understand our environment. It's a new way to understand our world, really. And the advantage of the sound recordings is that we get this direct and permanent, objective record of the environment and what's sort of happening. We've got sensors deployed all over Australia. These are the solar-powered recorders. The project that we had, the LEAF project, funds sort of infrastructure. So it doesn't actually fund the deployment of these and the maintenance of these recorders. So the project really runs on the sort of the goodwill of landholders. It runs the goodwill of the rangers and traditional owners and NGOs who actually sort of go out and service these recorders, swap SD cards over and post the SD cards to us. Nevertheless, it's working, and we've got sort of data kind of rolling in from all over Australia. I guess that then sort of begs the question, once you've collected the data, is really how to analyze it. And really, as I said at the beginning of the project, we had some ways of analyzing the data, but the ways we had didn't scale. We certainly couldn't analyze and understand all of the calls of the different species that we wanted to. I mean, essentially what we want to do is, from the spectrograms, is we want to pull apart these spectrograms, we want to pull apart the sound and find the calls of these species. So let me again play some more sounds, but this time sort of annotated with the actual calls of what's making the noise, what's singing. The low down one there, that's the Lewin's honeyeater. Different kind of honeyeaters. So we have a lot of bird watchers sort of helping us to sort of identify species. So with collecting all this data, we now need to sort of understand it. We now need to sort of pull the data apart to find out what's sort of going on. We've got far too much data for anybody to listen to. So it really is a big data project. There's more data than anybody could, manually listen to manually sort of observe in their whole lifetime. We're close to having 1,000 years of data already recorded in total. So the way that we want to understand and pull apart the data, of course, is by using sort of AI, by using sort of machine learning. In order to use machine learning, the sort of common way to do that now is to use a deep neural network. So what we've done is to build a deep neural network model, called classifier, to classify the sound data. These deep learning networks need a lot of data, so we have to train them on a lot of data to understand the bird calls and to be able to recognize them. So that there's unfortunately not a lot of money in the environment and this kind of thing. So we were kind of lucky in that there's a large online open access database where often sort of birders and citizen scientists can contribute calls. And that large database called Xenocanto is one which we can then use to train these sort of bird recognizers, these bird kind of classifiers from this large sort of freely available data set. The only problem with this is that this data set doesn't have a very good representation of Australian species. Most of the example calls which have been contributed are of North American or European species. So that gives us a bit of a problem. So the sort of traditional way that this works is that you take this large data set, in this case sort of Xeno-Canto, you train your sort of AI model on this large data set, which is of all these North European and European birds. And from that, you produce this model, this classifier. We can then take the Acoustic Observatory database, we can kind of chop it up into 5-second sound bites, and we can classify each of those sound bites. And providing it's a sound providing it's a call that the model has been trained on, one of these sort of Northern Hemisphere European or Northern American sort of species, it's going to do fairly well. And it does okay on some Australian species, but a lot of Australian species are not in the model because they're not in the original database of these free calls. And often the species we're interested in are sort of rare ones. They're species where we don't have a lot of calls. So one of the ways that we can deal with this is by using something called embeddings, and this is joint work with Google. So essentially what we do is we sort of extract from the model not the classifications to say what particular bird it is, and it only is able to classify these North American or European birds, but we take one of the layers before that, this sort of embeddings layers, which are really just descriptions of bird call features. So the system, the model has learned these generic descriptions of the bird calls, so things like the sort of the whistles, the trills, the squawks, and things like that. And we can then use those embeddings to do a number of things. They really are very powerful. So we can build lightweight recognizers using those for Australian species. We can use them to do a sort of similarity search. So we can have a kind of a search feature. And we can also do unsupervised things by kind of grouping similar sound bites together. So whilst we don't have a large corpus of Australian bird calls, we benefit from this freely available open access corpus of calls by using that to train classifiers. But rather than using the actual classifications, we just we use some of the features, some of the bird call features that the system has learnt to then do sort of further analysis. And we can do it in this variety of ways I've put down here. And this is a sort of joint project that we had with Google. So we built essentially an acoustic search tool, which enables you to sort of take a soundbite, and using that soundbite, we can find other sounds which are sort of similar to that in the Acoustic Observatory. So by using this technique of these sort of embeddings, the ways of being able to recognize components or parts, if you like, the syllables of bird calls, we can do search, we can build little classifiers for recognizing particular birds, and we can use it just to sort of understand the overall sort of soundscape through this sort of unsupervised learning. The way that we've pulled all of these projects together, so we've got a Acoustic Observatory project, which was this large ARC project, which sort of set up this network of recorders. We had some sort of analysis tools that we developed in collaboration with Google and others, is through a project we have with the Australian Research Data Commons. So this is an open source platform to manage, share, and analyze ecoacoustics data. And essentially, we've built a whole pipeline of sort of workflow, if you like, to sort of store and analyze data. And it's become more than that in that we also produce sort of training materials. We've run workshops. We're involved in sort of standardization. So it's more than a platform. It's really a community. So we've built a platform, but we've also sort of developed a community. So that's what I've done in terms of sort of ecoacoustics. There's a long history of ecoacoustics. Through sort of Moore's law, we're now able to sort of store and analyze all the data. We've got these great new sort of AI techniques for analyzing the data. We've got this wonderful project through the Australian Research Data Commons for storing the data and developing a whole kind of community around the data. What I want to do now is to talk about some sort of interesting observations, things that I've kind of learned along the way. The first thing is about data provenance and about how data was produced. One of the things that's important is that we want to know both where species are and where they aren't. So if you kind of hear a call, then you want to really know whether that call, was the call really there or not? Or if you don't hear a call, if there is no call, can you really be certain that there wasn't a call? Part of the important thing there is to have some sort of trust in the analysis sort of pipeline. So what we are able to do is to get a lot of provenance information about the annotated calls. So we certainly, if we sort of working backwards through this sort of pipeline here, if someone has validated the call, so if you've had a person, a birder actually check the call, we can kind of know who checked the call. If we've analyzed the data, for example, using some software like kind of BirdNet, we can store which software has the analysis ran with, what were the parameters, what were the software version. We can track what was the SD card that was used to store the data. The recorders themselves store the sort of time, they store the recording schedule, they store where they are. And even things like the microphone, the microphones have their own sort of ID. So we've got quite complete information going right from the actual sort of hardware that collected the data right the way through the sort of analysis and people who have checked the data to actually sort of understand whether a particular piece of data, whether how that particular piece of data was produced. There's a lot of sensitivities around data. So a lot of the data we collect, we have to worry about things like human speech. So we use human speech filters. Sometimes we collect data on private land. The private landholders don't necessarily want their data to be released, but they might be interested in having, say, their aggregate data released. So we can use techniques which are used in healthcare systems, for example, to not release details about an individual patient, but to release overall details about a cohort of patients. We can do a similar thing in terms of sort of landholders and properties by kind of grouping things. We need to be concerned about things like kind of threatened species, so we can kind of mask location to prevent people going out trying to find the species. And obviously we also need to be sort of cognizant of sort of cultural sensitivities and indigenous sort of IP and sort of sovereignty. So there's a lot of issues with, once you start collecting large amounts of data, there's a lot of issues around data governance that that we've had to become aware of and to deal with. We're very much predicated on open science. Open science, open access, and open source has sort of helped us in many, many ways. I've sort of mentioned a couple of projects, the Open Ecoacoustics and Acoustic Observatory projects. We've had a sort of a myriad of sort of small projects where we've worked with sort of small landholders and group to sort of store and analyze data and detect species. By using sort of open source software and building our own software and systems using open source licenses, it means that each project we've been involved with has always been able to build on the previous projects we've been doing. So basically the open source, using open source licenses for what we do and for the other people's software which we use, has enabled us to build the system. The training data I mentioned to build the recognizers makes use of open access data in the form of the sort of Xeno-Canto sort of database. So the only way that we're able to produce these, what are quite accurate models now for classifying bird calls and using embeddings to classify the bird calls, is through open access data. And the use of open and standardized licenses greatly simplifies a lot of the negotiations and things we've been in. We have over sort of 40 partners involved in the Acoustic Observatory, and the only way that we were able to negotiate those licenses and things was by having a commonly understood license about the data, which people understand. I mean, if you have something like a Creative Commons license, people understand it, and you don't need to have lawyers to help you because it's an understood standard license. So really the open source, open access, open science is really the only way that our projects in ecoacoustics were even feasible. So it's not only just, it's obviously the right thing to do, but it's also the way to actually make these kind of projects work. Another thing which we've been very keen on is, and obviously important at the moment, is not to take over the world and to be part of an ecosystem. So we haven't tried to sort of trap people within the open ecoacoustic system that we've built. So we've ensured that we can plug into the existing ecosystems in terms of bringing in data from other people's systems and exporting data to other systems like the Atlas of Living Australia and EcoCommons and things like that. We embed and support other people's analysis engines for analyzing audio data and things like that. And in general, we support other people's stuff by saying that, well, you can use our system, and we've got an open source web sort of user interface to use our system, but we also provide web services. So you can just treat our system like a database, and you can also use sort of web components, which are an interesting new kind of web sort of tool, which enables you to embed pieces of user interface in other sort of systems. So we've really tried as much as possible to be part of the community and to sort of thrive within the community in terms of our projects. We have focused on building community. We've run lots and lots of sort of workshops. We've run online tutorials, webinars, lots of sort of resources, been part of a local chapter of the International Ecoacoustics Symposia. So we've really focused a great deal on building community. Okay, so what I want to do now is just to sort of really motivate a kind of question, I think, about how we enable all of this and make all of this happen. One of the diagrams I'm not going to go into this diagram, but what I really want to get at here is just the complexity of these sorts of projects. The Open Ecoacoustics projects involves lots of technology, lots of systems. We do training and workshops, as I've mentioned. We're involved in standards. We work with sort of governments, with landholders, citizen scientists. We work with big technology companies like Google. We work with sort of small sort of NGOs, with individual sort of birding group and conservation groups. We work with lots of other universities, lots of other research sort of organizations. So it's very, very complex. There are a lot of parts, a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of technology. If you look at all the participants in the Acoustic Observatory, there are many, and this is just the Acoustic Observatory. If you look at the number of participants we have across all of the sort of projects that we support, there are over 50, probably getting close to 100 now. So we have lots and lots of sort of people involved. This isn't the research that I was trained for. So it's something that I've enjoyed doing. It's something that I've learned on the fly. But one of the things which interests me, particularly in my role at the moment, is how do we train people for this sort of new world of research that we're in? And this is my penultimate slide. So the way that I see it is that we've got these sort of previously research was really about a sort of a single person and their data. And we've now moved to these networks of people and organizations so that, research is no longer just an individual affair, if you like. And just as there are networks of people, there are also networks of data. When I say data, I don't just mean data. I'm talking about kind of models and code and services as well, and apps. It's not just a matter of being able to upload or download a data set. It's about sort of large data sets. It's about AI and provenance and trust and licensing and services and fair and care principles. So there are all of these sort of complex things which researchers now need to sort of deal with to sort of live within these networks of people and researchers and networks of kind of data systems. And I think one of the questions that we now sort of face is how do we support and train particularly early career researchers and research students to live in this new world, because as you've seen, it's a wonderful world, but it's very complex, and it's not the sort of simple research world that it used to be. Okay, I'll just wrap up by thanking all of my many collaborators and team. This has very much not been an individual effort. It's been involved lots and lots of sort of different people and different projects. And particularly, again, want to acknowledge the traditional custodians where I've been working, where we collect data and work. And I'm happy to answer any questions.